Going on? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show on DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show, taking a look back at racing from this past weekend. That would be the weekend of June the 16th. Some racing from Churchill Downs, a little bit from Belmont Park as well. And the recaps will give you a stakes montage for the races that we couldn't dive into, as well as the weekend's best buyer speed figure performances and a little bit of what's on tap for this upcoming week on DRF TV. If you listen to the show podcast form, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com. If you listen on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. If you listen on iTunes, give us a nice little rating and a little review. It would be greatly appreciated. Again, the racing from this past weekend, predominantly at Churchill Downs, unfortunately, for reasons that we are all aware of, cannot use the video from these races, so we will just kind of dive into the recap as we normally do, just without the actual stretch run. So let's first things first. We'll start off with the lone Grade 1 of the evening. Let's take a look at the field that ran in the Grade 1 Stephen Foster Handicap. This is a win and you're in for the Breeders' Cup Classic, a mile and an eighth on the main track. These are 3-year-olds and up, but they're predominantly older horses. And this race boiled down to if Backyard Heaven could successfully wheel back on what for him is short notice and stretch out to a mile and an eighth, he was going to be very difficult to defeat because he was so impressive winning the Ali Sheba on Derby weekend. And it just felt like he was really untested at this point. Looks like the sky is the limit. Then you have some more interesting side cases. You had a horse like Pavel, who last year as a 3-year-old looked like he could really turn into anything. His 4-year-old campaign has been very, very disappointing thus far, but circumstances have also led to that. You had a horse like Looking at Lee, who all of a sudden employed a brand new racing style in his most recent race. He was forwardly placed, but it felt like he was more likely than not going to revert to a running style coming from well out of it. And then you had Irish Warcry, who we know Irish Warcry on his best day is a very, very good horse, and on his worst day is a very, very bad horse. Well, ultimately the race was run, and Pavel is the one that comes out on top, as we can see from the results. He goes off at odds of 6-1 as your third choice in the wagering. The fourth choice, Honorable Duty, runs another game second. He's a really nice horse going out there. Corey Lannery had the mount. He finishes second at odds of 7-1. And the longest shot on the board, Matru, rounds out your trifecta at odds of 68-1. If you had that trifecta for 50 cents, it came back $762.55. Really impressive effort from Pavel in this spot, and let's dive into him a little bit deeper here and just overall what we're looking at for a racehorse. He's 3 of 10 lifetime. He's over $1.1 million in career earnings. He's owned by Redham Racing, LLC, trained by Doug O'Neill, bred by Brereton C. Jones and Windstar Farm, LLC, in the state of Kentucky, or the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Mario Gutierrez. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by Creative Cause out of a Maria's Mon mare named Mons Venus. From the numbers and figures standpoint, 101 buyer speed figure, 128 time form U.S. rating for Pavel, winning the Grade 1 Stephen Foster. For what it's worth, time form U.S. had the half-mile call, color-coded red, meaning it was fast, possibly compromising some of the forwardly placed horses, possibly helping some of the horses coming from a little bit farther out of it. Final eighth of a mile for Pavel in this race in 12:96. The runner-up, Honorable Duty, the final eighth in 13:09. Matru, 13:03. And Hawakam, 13:06. When you look, really, there's a lot to take out of this race, a lot to digest. Let's begin with the winner, Pavel. You hear Doug O'Neill talk a little bit in his last couple of races, and this is a quote. In his last couple of races, he got really worked up in the paddock and didn't run to his best. We know he likes to travel, and I have to thank our groom and exercise rider for coming out here early with him and getting acclimated to the track. I'm not sure what we'll do with him next time. Then we hear from Marty McGee in a little bit of the race recap, which you can find on DRF.com. The next start, according to Doug O'Neill, could be the Pacific Classic out at Del Mar on August the 18th at a 1.25 miles. Mile and a quarter doesn't seem like it's much of an issue for Pavel. He ran as well as he did as a 3-year-old last year in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. So I don't think the distance is a concern. The concern now becomes who is Pavel? Because he had those instances where you could have made excuses for the Breeders' Cup Classic too much too soon last year. They just threw him to the wolves. You could make an excuse for the Grade 1 Malibu, his final start as a 3-year-old, because 7/8 of a mile, probably not what he wants to do. You can make an excuse for the San Antonio or the San Pasquale, one of the two. I don't remember which race it was, but he had a miserable trip in there, all sorts of traffic. Likely best, but he had to be just absolutely swung out to the outside behind a wall of horses. So don't hold that against him. And then the Dubai World Cup, he is up against it from a race shape standpoint as well as a bias standpoint, where speed was boss out at Meydan, and he was mid-pack more or less. Then you come to the the Gold Cup out at Santa Anita. And the Gold Cup to me was the sort of, I felt like if he didn't show up there with a good effort, then I was going to get off the train. And I admitted when we did the stakes preview for this race, I was off the Pavel train. I loved him as a 3-year-old, and I thought they may have kind of hurt him running in a race like the Breeders' Cup. But he did have some circumstances go against him, and perhaps we were going to get the best run here. Dan Illman brought up the case that maybe this was a horse that needed that race in the Gold Cup, and you were going to see the best version of Pavel that you could in this race on Saturday night, and that's exactly what we got. We got the best version of Pavel. So again, tip of the cap to Illman, tip of the cap to Mike Watchmaker, DRF National Handicapper as well. My concern with Pavel here, it's not so much what we saw. He looked really impressive. The problem is, I don't know what the heck he beat, because now we can segue into factoring in the top 2 betting choices and how bad they were. Let's begin with the 4-5 favorite, who was nowhere. Backyard Heaven. Backyard Heaven was a horse that had a beautiful trip throughout in this race, and when the real running started, he absolutely backed up in the worst way possible. He couldn't go by Uncle Mojo. Now, there's some other things that maybe we need to address about Saturday night at Churchill Downs. Apparently, it was very, very hot and very, very muggy, and that usually doesn't bode well for any athlete. It's not a great situation. Nobody loves playing in that, but an instance like this, you would have to hope that for Backyard Heaven's sake, that's what we saw here, because I'm really reluctant to call this a bounce, because he had already run well in those races prior to the run at Churchill on Derby weekend. He had a lot of time off. He had, almost 7 weeks? To me, you don't bounce off of a 7-week layoff. It's just more a matter of, did you run or not? You hear Rad Ortiz Jr. say, it wasn't his day today. He just never really picked up things around there. He just didn't fire. Chad Brown, the day after, reporting through Marty McGee, extremely disappointed. It was a lost opportunity in a race where he had a beautiful trip on a track we know he likes. I hate to bring up the excuse of the heat because every horse has to run under the same conditions, but I'm hoping it was just a matter of that. And I understand what Chad's saying. You're not looking to make an excuse, but, I mean, the fact of the matter is the horse may have not liked it, may have not liked the conditions, and you can't, that's not anything anybody can account for. It's not something that Chad could have foreseen. It's not something that, you don't know how a horse is going to take to it until they try to. So I understand what Chad's saying. To me, that's not using an excuse. And you're right, everyone did need to run in the same sort of elements, but some horses take to it better than others, same as some athletes take to certain weather conditions better than others. For what it's worth, they're going to still consider the Whitney on August the 4th for this horse, Backyard Heaven. Chad said something along the lines of, we'll see how he goes in training and ultimately decide if that's the appropriate spot to go with. But nonetheless, I think he summed it up very well at the beginning. Extremely disappointed. This was a very disappointing effort from this horse because he looked so good winning the Ali Sheba. You kind of thought that, okay, now we've got a major player. If he can stretch out to this 9th furlong and successfully get it, now we've got a big-time player, and now you just have more questions than answers coming out of the Foster for Backyard Heaven. As far as Irish Warcry is concerned, I can't say that you have more questions than answers about him because we had a million questions going into it. I picked him in this race. I thought coming out of that run at Pimlico, he was finally, they, boom, put it together, and I have to be honest, the position that Jose Ortiz took up is exactly kind of the situation that I wanted. I needed him to be forwardly placed. And going into the far turn, I'm at a wedding on Saturday night watching the race. And when all of a sudden I see Jose look back like this, I said, oh, this is not good. And then he eased the horse. And Graham Motion said Jose did right by the horse. And I agree with that. Apparently, if the horse is not traveling, he's not taking it, then you got to take care of him. And then you hear Motion afterward. I second-guessed my decision to run. I thought it would cool off. When we shipped out here, it was really hot. And tonight, it just didn't cool off at all. The problem now, I shouldn't even say now. The problem with Irish Warcry, I have to finally just say it blanketly. This is what it is. You can't trust this horse. And it makes it so, so difficult in any race worthwhile when he shows up. Because you know on his best day, he could have won this race. His best race could have won this race. If Pavel won this with a 101 buyer, Irish Warcry is capable of running a 101. His best race can win grade 1 races. The problem is no one has any idea when they're going to come. So now maybe he just absolutely needs perfect, ideal racing conditions, which makes me wonder a little bit about where you run a horse like this. My guess would be, as much as the East Coast contingent, everyone circles Saratoga, if he couldn't handle Louisville in June, he's sure as heck not going to be able to handle Saratoga in August. So I'd be surprised if you saw him there. And I don't think anything has come out. And if there has, fire away at me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt, or in the comment section below on the YouTube channel. Maybe it's a little bit unorthodox. I think I'd send him out to Del Mar. Because Del Mar, at least you're going to get more favorable conditions, more likely than not. You're very rarely going to get very, very hot. You're going to get some hot days, but you're very rarely going to get the hot and humid that you get up at Saratoga, what feels like at least 3/4 of the time that you're running up there. So to me, I wonder if this is an instance where you ship him to the West Coast, you try to run him out there, and you hope that at least come Breeders' Cup time. The only good news is, for the Classic, being at Churchill in November, you're not going to have a really, really hot day. You're going to have probably more advantageous conditions for a horse like this. Nonetheless, wherever he goes, he is just incredibly, incredibly difficult to have any sort of faith in if you're betting him. Be sure to get a big number and get a good look, if you can, at Irish Warcry prior to any one of his next races. As for the rest of the field, I don't have a heck of a lot to say. I think Honorable Duty's a really nice horse, really talented. He's very capable of getting minor awards in races like this. I don't think he's grade 1 caliber. 96 Beyer, 123 time Form US rating. But then again, the quality of this field becomes more and more of a concern, because you get a horse like Matru, who is a very talented horse, but I don't think anyone looked at this clearly. He was 68-1. He was the longest shot on the board. The fact that he comes on and nearly gets second in a race like this, to me, red flag. Hawakam, we know his game, take him back, make one run, but it feels like at 8 years old, he's probably long in the tooth, and he's not really a major threat in any of these grade 1 races to win anyway. He's better off used underneath, and he's better off, as far as a win candidate is concerned, in those grade 2s and grade 3s. Uncle Mojo, who's the pace setter, he finishes 5th. It's very difficult for me to get all jazzed up about this race, knowing that the big boys didn't show up, and one of the logical alternatives ran one of his better races, but considering he had not had his best form coming into this, it just makes me wonder overall as a whole what we saw on Saturday night beneath the Twin Spires. Nonetheless, Pavel earns his way into the Breeders' Cup Classic with this victory, a 101 Beyer, 128 time Form US rating. And who knows, if this older division continues to just stumble a little bit, and we know there's that big horse down there in the 3-year-old division who's going to be a force to be reckoned with wherever he shows up and whenever he faces older horses, which would probably be the Breeders' Cup Classic. I just think, you know what, maybe Pavel, maybe he is ready to go. But you know what, I'm going to reserve judgment, withhold judgment anyway. I want to see what he does in his next start, and it sounds like the next start for Pavel could be in the Pacific Classic at Del Mar. But nonetheless, grade 1 winner Pavel, he gets the job done in the Stephen Foster. The Fleur de Lis was the race run prior to the Stephen Foster for older fillies and mares. Let's take a look at that field. 9 of them signed on. Post-time favorite was Blue Prize, going out for Nacho Correas, Jose Ortiz. She's a little bit of versatility, some tactical ability. She can be close to the pace. She can lay mid-pack and still come on with a run. And she has an affinity for Churchill Downs. The likely pace setter was going to be Farrell in a race like this, although it looked like it could end up being a little bit of a spirited pace on the front end. Then you had a horse like Mopatism coming in from the West Coast, who Doug O'Neill has run her in a number of positions, and she may not be the most talented filly, but at the same time, she usually shows up with a pretty representative effort. And if you chose to go against all of them, you had a horse like Valadorna or Song of Spring. You had a few different ways you could go in here. Ultimately, the favorite prevailed. Blue Prize gets the job done. She pays $6.60 on top. Farrell, the pace setter, in a race that the pace didn't actually materialize the way that some of us thought it would early on, runs second at odds of 8-1, and Mopatism coming in from Southern California rounds out your trifecta at odds of 9-2 for O'Neill and Mario Gutierrez. Let's take a look a little bit deeper at Blue Prize. She is 5 of 14 lifetime. You can see she's 13 of 14 in the money. Over $605,000 in career earnings, owned by Maribel Stable LLC, trained by Nacho Correas. The breeder, I'm probably going to screw this up. BioArt SA, I don't know if it is someone's name, and I apologize in advance, but you can see that she was bred down in Argentina. Ridden to victory by Jose Ortiz. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She is by Pure Prize out of a not-for-sale mare named Blues for Sale. Byron Speed figure 94, time form US rating 120 for Blue Prize, winning the Fleur de Lis. This is a big race as far as the Breeders' Cup Distaff is concerned. I believe it was a win and you're in. And now it's good to note that the Breeders' Cup this year is at Churchill Downs, a track that this filly is, or mare at this point, she's 5 years old, has had a considerable amount of success. And you listen to Correas after the race, quote, "This filly absolutely loves it here at Churchill Downs, as do I. It was a great race from her, and it sets her up for a good year with the Breeders' Cup back here in November. She's improved since we got her from Argentina, and I think she's just getting better. I could be wrong. I believe she needs to be supplemented to get into the Breeders' Cup, but at this point, that seems like a no-brainer for these connections. And again, the fact that she likes it underneath the Twin Spires, she's run well in chillier conditions. We've seen her carry that form up to New York in the past, so November isn't going to be any kind of an issue in Louisville for her. And I thought it was a good race. I didn't think it was a spectacular effort. Not one, put it this way, this race right here, this effort will not win the Breeders' Cup Distaff, but maybe there's a scenario where she continues to improve, and who knows, maybe she's one that ultimately can get a little bit of a piece. A concern is the overall quality of this field behind her. Farrell, we know what her game is. She's speed, but I was a little bit concerned about the distance, and also the fact that no one else really went with it early. You see these fractions, 23 and 4, 48 and 2 for a half, 12 and 2 for 3/4, and they got the mile in 37. To me, it's just an instance where she had everything go her way on the front end, and she still wasn't good enough. And I think part of it was Blue Prize just being better, and part of it, I think, was the 9th furlong. I don't think she's truly a 9 furlong horse. I think she's better off at a 1-turn mile or going 8.5 furlongs. But then you look at the rest of this field, Mopetism. I love her, but she's just a notch or two below the best horses. She's not truly a distaff type. I know she ran decently enough at Del Mar, but that was a home game. And maybe that's part of the reason that they chose to ship her out, along with being the riding buddy of Pavel, who ultimately won that Stephen Foster, which we talked about at the top. But I don't know. I mean, it's not as though I don't think this was a decent field, but I don't know that this is one that's necessarily going to have major implications as far as the distaff is concerned. When you think about the other horses that these girls are going to have to face, the likes of Unique Bella, the likes of Abel Tasman, you name it. You look at Monomoy Girl, you look at some of these other fillies and mares, they're very, very talented. Not that Blue Prize isn't, and again, I can't stress that enough. But if I'm thinking specifically for a race like the Breeders' Cup Distaff, as is constituted right now, I just don't think she's as talented. Now, maybe she continues to improve as a 5-year-old mare and gets better and better as the season progresses and we get closer and closer to the first weekend in November at Churchill. But as of right now, good on her. She got the job done in this spot. But I do question a little bit if she's as good as the best of the best. Let's go through a couple of these other runners. Farrell, again, talked about her. Mopetism spoke about her. Valadorna, difficult position being wide there. Disappointing effort nonetheless. I don't think she's supposed to fade as badly as she did. But at the same time, I took a shot with her in this race, but acknowledging I was concerned about that final 16th of a mile. Losing ground's never going to help your cause. And let's call a spade a spade. She probably is a notch or two below, as are the rest of the girls in this field. It'll be interesting to see what comes from this race and where many of these horses go. Blue Prize, they've tried her up at Saratoga in the past. I wonder if you try that again. An interesting race to me for her, and timing-wise, I think it should work out okay, would be a race like the Delaware Handicap at 1.25 miles. Try that. There's big money down there at Delaware Park. I don't think distance is a problem for Blue Prize. And realistically, unless you get one of the other big girls that decides that they want to ship out of town and ship in for that race, why not an opportunity like that for a horse like Blue Prize? Who knows? That would just be a thought for me. There was nothing even whispered about that being a possibility, but that would just be a thought for me. Blue Prize, though, she is much the best, winning the Fleur de Lis, the 2018 edition of that at Churchill Downs on Saturday night. 94 buyer, 120 time form US rating. Big turf race of the night at Churchill on Saturday was the Wise Dan, a Grade 2 event, 1 mile and a 16th, 3-year-olds and up. Let's take a look at the field. You had 7 that went in here. The question was, will we finally get to see the Good World Approval, the horse that won Champion Turf Mail last year in 2017? Would he finally come back? Because it felt like his 2 races prior to this in 2018 were just a little bit lackluster. One of them was a victory down at Tampa Bay, but then he came back and was terrible out at Santa Anita, missed some other races he was supposed to run in. And in theory, he's just better than these horses that he was running against on Saturday night at Churchill Downs. The question was, would he be able to get over the hump? Well, unfortunately for him and the connections, he did not. He kind of bombs as the even money favorite, and Mr. Misunderstood for Brad Cox is the winner of the Grade 2 Wise Dan at odds of 5-2. The runner-up is Inspector Lindley, beating a half length for Jose Ortiz and Chug McGahee. Then the third place finisher is Mr. Cub, the pace setter, who runs third at odds of 10-1, rounding out a trifecta that for 50 cents comes back $92.95. Let's talk about Mr. Misunderstood for Brad Cox a little bit more. 10 of 17 lifetime, 12 times in the exact to $574,714 in career earnings. Owned by Flurry Racing Stables, LLC. Trained by Brad Cox. Bred by Athens Woods in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Florent Giroux, and you can see the horse card at the bottom of the page. This is the pedigree by Arch out of an Afternoon Delights mare named Jody's Delight. 100 Buyer Speed Figure, 129 Time Form U.S. rating for Mr. Misunderstood, winning the Wise Dan. Time Form U.S. had all the calls of this race color-coded blue, meaning it was favoring horses forwardly placed and potentially compromising horses coming from off of the pace, which makes World Approval's effort look that much worse. Again, a 100 buyer for Mr. Misunderstood, 129 Time Form U.S. rating. I feel like these distances, these middle distances, a mile to a mile and 16th, really his bread and butter. I don't know that he's a grade 1 winner, but I think he's better than some of the races we had seen, particularly the one at Keeneland. That was a little bit of a, just draw a line through it, because I think he did a lot of running considering the lack of pace in there. Lack of pace in here, but he's more forwardly placed down on the inside. Thought it was a good ride from Flo. Produced him at the right time, goes and gets the job done. Inspector Lindley, we kind of know what Inspector Lindley is. He's a bit of an in and outer. Sometimes he'll come with a big effort, and other times he'll come with a subpar one. Mr. Cub, give credit where credit's due. This was a good ride and a good training effort from Ian Wilkes to get this horse to be forwardly placed and to run as well as he did. I don't think he ran poorly. The 99 buyer is one of the best of his career, 125 Time Form U.S. rating. The horse that you're going to want to take, maybe with the exception of Mr. Misunderstood, out of this race, is Divisadero. Divisadero is a horse that, making his second start for Kelly Rubley, came back and ran well in that race at Monmouth Park a few weeks back. They come here in his second start off of a prolonged layoff, and I thought he ran very, very well. He got a 98 buyer and a 125 Time Form U.S. rating. He's stacked up, loaded, going around the far turn. There's nowhere for him to go. Eventually, at the top of the lane, wheels out into the clear and comes with a rush at the end. Comes home in 28.65. You combine the trouble, or not the trouble, but the traffic, with how fast he came home, with the lack of pace in front of him, and this was his second start off the bench, all of a sudden Divisadero becomes interesting going forward. Now, the question is, which races is he best suited for? Because it's long been sort of debated. Is he better at a mile to a mile and 16th, or is he better at a mile and a quarter and some races a little bit longer? I happen to think that his late kick is more potent at these middle distances, a mile to a mile and 16th, which to me leads you, if you really want to get crazy and start thinking big picture, and maybe it's a little bit premature to be thinking like this, but Divisadero has run his best races at Churchill Downs. There's really no question about it. He's run them at best at a little bit longer as far as the distance is concerned, but he's run really well at a mile in the past. If I'm working backwards, I'm thinking we've got a pretty darn big race at a mile here the first Saturday in November, Breeders' Cup Mile. He may not be good enough anymore, but to me, that's the kind of race you're more likely than not going to get an honest pace. He likes the turf course very clearly. The mile is within his scope. Maybe he's better slightly longer, but a mile is certainly within his range. I'd be thinking backwards already from that race. And you know what? If he shows up, and let's say I think he's run well in the Arlington Million in the past. Let's say that's where they choose to go with him. You can start figuring out a way to get this horse, circle the Breeders' Cup, and work your way back. I think, again, I'm thinking way long term, and maybe this is premature to even be thinking like this because this is a horse that's had physical issues in the past. I'm thinking Breeders' Cup Mile for a horse like this. Start working backwards. How do you want to plot your plan to get there? And by the way, you probably still need to win a race before you can get there, if we're being totally honest. If he can't win any of these other races, then he probably doesn't belong in the Breeders' Cup. But I think you get a lot of things going for you if you're in the camp of Divisadero. He can still clearly run. He just needs a little bit more racing luck and a little bit of pace. As for World Approval, Mark Casse was quoted after the race. Someone asked him, is he the same horse? Mark said, well, he trains and looks as good, but so far his last two performances haven't looked it, so I don't know. Our job is to figure that out. Johnny V said he just didn't run his race at all. I was just telling Mark it feels like the grass is very loose. He's running the soft and he's run on the firm turf, but this just feels like it's coming up underneath of him and he's not really getting a grip of it. And then he just didn't run. Boy, you know, it is really one of those things. I think Mark Casse summed it up pretty well. It doesn't matter how well they look in training. It just, if he's not running the same races in the afternoon, then maybe he's not the same horse that he once was. It's probably still slightly premature to just write him off entirely because it's only been two really, really poor efforts. The Tampa race was good, but it was workmanlike. I think if he comes back and everything is sound, and maybe some things will come out, obviously stay tuned to live.drf.com or drf.com in general. I think you got to give him at least one more effort before you just say, it's over. He can't run anymore. He's not the same horse. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't trending that direction. I mean, these are two consecutive terrible, terrible efforts from a horse that was his whole sort of hallmark. He may not win them all, but he was very rarely going to come up with a complete dud. Now he's had two in a row. And you know what? I mean, it is what it is. If at 6 years old, maybe he's not the same horse that he was. He did a lot of traveling last year. He was all over the country. He ran big races. He obviously won the Breeders' Cup Mile. We'll find out. It's still a little bit premature, but I think we are trending the wrong direction with a horse like World Approval, especially considering the setup that he had in this race and how flat he was down the lane. He earns a 93 Beyer and a 119 Time Form US rating. Mr. Misunderstood, though, is in great form, and he's in great hands with Brad Cox. Florent Giroux, a great ride. He gets the job done in the Wise Dan. 100 Beyer, 129 Time Form US rating, but one that you might want to throw in your horse watch. And if we're thinking way down the road, maybe Divisadero come Breeders' Cup Mile time is not a crazy long shot to be considering, at least underneath, should they end up going there. 3-year-old event Saturday night was the Matt Win. Let's take a look at that field. Going 2 turns, a mile and a 16th. They were all going to need to beat Axeman, going out for Bob Baffert and Mike Smith, the jockey-trainer combo that teamed up to win the Triple Crown this year on Justify. But I suppose outside of him, if you really wanted to make a case, you were going to get paid. Combatant was the second choice ultimately at odds of 7-2. And the good news, if you were someone that was trying to fade chalk, both of them bombed. Because King Zachary, he headed the all Dale Romans Exacta, getting the job done at odds of 12-1 in the 21st running of the Matt Win. Tis Mischief runs second at odds of 10-1, and Axeman's defeated as your 1-2 favorite, running third. Let's talk about the winner before we dive into the sort of no-shows in here. King Zachary's an interesting horse. He earns a 98 Beyer and a 124 Time Form US rating. You can see he's 3 of 6 lifetime, over $172,000 in career earnings, owned by Thomas Conway, trained by Dale Romans, bred by Waymore LLC in Kentucky, ridden victory by Rob. 3-year-old event Saturday night was the Matt Win. Let's take a look at that field. Going 2 turns, a mile and a 16th. They were all going to need to beat Axeman, going out for Bob Baffert and Mike Smith, the jockey-trainer combo that teamed up to win the Triple Crown this year on Justify. But I suppose outside of him, if you really wanted to make a case, you were going to get paid. Combatant was the second choice ultimately at odds of 7-2. And the good news, if you were someone that was trying to fade chalk, both of them bombed. Because King Zachary, he headed the all Dale Romans Exacta, getting the job done at odds of 12-1 in the 21st running of the Matt Win. Tis Mischief runs second at odds of 10-1, and Axeman's defeated as your 1-2 favorite, running third. Let's talk about the winner before we dive into the sort of no-shows in here. King Zachary's an interesting horse. He earns a 98 Beyer and a 124 Time Form US rating. You can see he's 3 of 6 lifetime, over $172,000 in career earnings, owned by Thomas Conway, trained by Dale Romans, bred by Waymore LLC in Kentucky, ridden victory by Robbie Alvarado, and you can see the pedigree. It's beautiful. He's by Curlin out of a Giants Causeway mare named On My Way. Again, 98 Beyer, 124 Time Form US rating. Time Form US had the opening quarter color-coded blue, meaning it was slow, favoring horses that are forwardly placed, potentially compromising horses coming from off of it. I would imagine part of the reason that your 1-2-3 finishers were 1-2-3 basically at every call of this entire run. Now, King Zachary is a horse. I picked him in the Wood Memorial. And the problem with him going into the Wood, coming out of the Wood, and in his allowance win following the Wood was he wasn't getting any faster. I thought he looked really good. I said it in the preview video that we did for this race last weekend. I said, you know what? I think he's a good horse, but until he runs fast, I can't sit here and tell you that he is for certain. Well, guess what? Now he's run fast, if you believe this buyer. I don't want to say believe the buyer, but I'm a little bit concerned because all of a sudden he's jumped from mid to high 70s all the way to a high 90. This makes him one of the fastest 3-year-olds in the crop. Where did it come from? Again, he looked so good winning that race down at Gulfstream that I thought maybe there was something here. And I love the way that he kicked home. He came home in 30-61. When you compare that to the second and third place finishers, Tiz Mischief came home in 31:52, and Axeman came home in 32:86. I mean, he was coming home nearly 5 lengths faster than the runner-up. So I think this was a big league effort from King Zachary, I suppose, just from a numbers standpoint strictly. Visually, he's done good things in the past, no question about it. From a numbers standpoint, it is a little bit out of left field. Tiz Mischief is part of the reason that I'm concerned about this race as a whole, because Tiz Mischief, thus far as a 3-year-old, has been terrible. And now all of a sudden he jumps up to a low 90. I'm just having kind of a hard time totally buying into it, especially when you consider how bad the 1-2 favorite ran Axeman. Let's get to Axeman. Axeman, considering these fractions and considering how fast he had gone at Santa Anita and at Pimlico, I have a hard time seeing how he didn't make the front in here. Now, you hear Mike Smith in the post-race quotes, and we'll throw some things out here now. Quote, he just completely lost it. I've never seen him act like that. He was so bad we couldn't even get the ear things out of his ears. I don't know how he got to the gate in one piece, and then he got in there and he was tearing things up. He was kicking at the gate with both back legs. So clearly he wasn't in the best frame of mind for a horse race. And then you hear Bob Baffert afterwards say he was just never comfortable in there. Mike said he was a handful all the way around. He's not a horse that travels well, so he should be better when he gets back home. Well, I take issue with the second piece because he traveled just... I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say he traveled just fine. But you didn't see any ill effects traveling to Baltimore 4 weeks ago. He handled that very well. And again, I shouldn't say he handled it well. Maybe he didn't travel well, but it didn't affect him on the racetrack. Now all of a sudden it affects him on the racetrack. That's why I don't know what to make of that. But look, they know a heck of a lot more about the horse than I do. It was such a bad effort. And for a horse that is very capable of going 46 to a half mile, for him to be sitting off in 48, at least you have some reason to understand why, because apparently he was throwing a bit of a fit and didn't feel like running. It's still not a good look for him going forward, because now I don't know what you want to do with him. Do you trust him wherever he shows up? What do you do with him now? Do you turn him back to a one-turn race and try to make him a sprinter? I don't even know what you want to do with him, truth be told. But this was an unmitigated disaster. A horse that it was an equally bad effort was Combatant. Combatant felt like the kind of horse that these sort of more middle distances were going to be beneficial for him. A mile and a 16th, maybe even a one-turn mile. But I voiced some concerns about what he was facing in Arkansas. That Arkansas Derby has come back god-awful right now. Really, really, really bad. And now you have to wonder, did he look good against a bad bunch of horses down there in Hot Springs over the winter? Because so far that race has not come back good, with the exception of Tenfold. But even when he ran in the Arkansas Derby, it was a lot for him in a short amount of time. I just really am starting to question that overall form down there, and Combatant really did nothing to sort of sway me any other direction. It seems like right now I'm staying away from those horses. I'm still interested to see what we get out of these top two. Tiz Mischief, it didn't seem like he was doing anything as a 3-year-old, and then all of a sudden he runs a decent race here on Saturday night. I've always thought highly of King Zachary, just needed him to run fast. If you believe Saturday night, he has finally run fast, and if you believe that this is what he is going forward, he's very, very interesting as a 3-year-old in a number of different spots. We know that Romans is not afraid to take on big horses no matter where they end up running, whether it happens to be in New Jersey or New York or California or Kentucky or wherever it may be. The first fast race of King Zachary's career. It comes in the Grade 3 Matt win. He gets the job done with a 98 Beyer and a 124 time Form US rating. Shift our attention out to the West Coast. 3-year-old fillies going a mile and a 16th in the Summertime Oaks, a Grade 2 event. Let's take a look at the field. 6 of them were signed on in here. This was an interesting spot because it didn't seem like there was a real boss in this group here of 6 fillies. You had 13 squared for Baffert, one of the Southern California hometown heroes. And she's a nice filly, but she is no superstar. You had Chocolate Martini shipping in for Tom Amos, who, from a class standpoint, was the horse to beat. From a speed figure standpoint, was the horse to beat. But the concern had to be her running style at Santa Anita. Santa Anita in route races, forwardly placed horses are at a very, very serious advantage over horses coming from off of it. And the fact that, you know what, it's just very difficult to make up that kind of ground when you're going to be spotting horses' tactical advantages over tracks that may not be friendly to you. And then you had the unknown, the new shooter in here coming in from Northern California in Ollie's Candy, trying dirt for the first time, trying 2 turns for the first time underneath Kent DeSormo for Billy Morey. Could she get the job done? Michael Rona, for the first time this weekend in the recap edition, we get a recap, a stretch run. Here it is, the stretch of the Summertime Oaks.
Chocolate Martini, who has 3 or 4 lengths to pick up, staying near the inside. It's Ollie's Candy on the outside, really putting it to 13 squared at the 8th pole in the Summertime Oaks. They're well clear of Zusha and Chocolate Martini. The litmus test for Ollie's Candy. She's ahead in the front from 13 squared. Ollie's Candy clearing some significant hurdles while
Ollie's Candy prevails, gets the job done at odds of 7-2 as the third choice over 13 squared in a prolonged battle down the lane. And your third place finisher is Chocolate Martini. She was 4 1/4 lengths back of the top 2 finishers. Let's talk about Ollie's Candy. She's perfect so far in her brief career. She's 3 for 3, over $151,000 in career earnings, owned by Paul and Karen Eggert, trained by Billy Morey, bred by Paul and Karen Eggert. You can see Kent DeSormo had the ride. And as far as the pedigree is concerned, she is by Candy Ride out of a stroll mare named Afternoon Stroll. And by the way, this filly was bred in the state of Kentucky. My apologies. 90 Beyer speed figure, 113 time form U.S. rating for Ollie's Candy. 89 Beyer, 114 time form U.S. rating for 13 squared. Those two were the only 2 horses involved in the pace throughout. And again, that just is the profile of route races at Santa Anita. So they both had a little bit of an advantage there. But there were some certain things that Ollie's Candy did that I think were very, very intriguing and very positive going forward. First things first, if you go back and watch the entirety of that race, when she breaks, when the gates open, the ground breaks beneath her. She slipped. She didn't really get a good grasp of that. So the fact that she overcame that, moved up, stalked a pace, really properly stalked for the first time in her career, ran on dirt for the first time in her career, was not pulling, going 2 turns for the first time in her career, and then was able to get into a battle with a much more seasoned horse, a horse that is grade 1 placed. There are a lot of good things to pull from this race for Ollie's Candy. She's done a lot in a short amount of time, and I got to be honest, I'm impressed with her. I don't know if she's a superstar or not, and I don't know if she's one of the best 3-year-old fillies there are or not, but it's hard to argue with what she's done so far, and I think Bill Morey has done a very good job of getting her to where she is now, and it sounds like they're likely to try the grade 2 San Clemente on turf out at Del Mar. That's going to be run on July the 21st. And boy, how valuable would that be? If you could all of a sudden, even if she doesn't win, say she hits the board down there. She's already graded stakes placed winner on dirt. Graded stakes placed winner. She's already a graded winner on dirt. If she is graded stakes placed on the turf, or even if she were to win on the turf, my goodness, her value as a mare just goes through the roof already. But you then all of a sudden have bigger things that you can kind of take a look at going down the road. Perhaps you think about shipping to Saratoga. And again, one thing at a time. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But she's handled synthetic. She's handled dirt. Don't no reason to think that she won't handle the turf. I like that she can be forwardly placed. That's always advantageous in turf racing, especially if you have a little bit of a finish. For what it's worth, I know it's dirt, but she came home in 32.07. It's not like she was slowing down. She galloped out well. I don't have any negatives to say anything about Ollie's Candy. I liked everything about this. I like all 3 of her races so far. She's very interesting. If she continues to get some seasoning, she's in great hands. I think she's very, very interesting. She's a nice 3-year-old. 13 squared, I've made no bones about it. I'm not the biggest fan of hers. I don't think she's a superstar. She ran a good race here, and we'll leave it at good, but considering she had the seasoning advantage, she had the pace advantage over Ollie's Candy, she's probably supposed to get it done if she's superior to a horse like Ollie's Candy. And I just think, plain and simple, she's not. I'm going to give Chocolate Martini the benefit of the doubt here. Chocolate Martini, again, was shipping into Southern California for the first time, was running from off of the pace in a race that didn't feature a ton of early speed, over a racing surface that is not conducive to her running style. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. I think she's better than what we saw here, and you get her back to a more even surface, probably on the East Coast somewhere. I don't know where, but somewhere. I think she could be an interesting one. Don't totally write Chocolate Martini off. I think she's better than what you saw Saturday afternoon. But I'm telling you, a horse that I'm really intrigued on and seeing what we get going forward with her is Ollie's Candy. Great connections, and I like everything I've seen in 3 lifetime starts. She gets the job done in the Grade 2 Summertime Oaks with a 90 Beyer and a 113 time form U.S. rating. Last race we'll recap here on this week's recap edition is the Poker from Sunday afternoon, Father's Day, June the 17th. Let's take a look at the field of 8 that went a mile at Belmont Park. This was a race that, your favorite ended up being Bala Rocks, but you really could have gone a few different ways in here. You had 3 horses that were 3-1 or less. You had a bunch of horses that were in single digits. Only 2 of them were double digits going off, and they ran last and second to last. So the wagering public had a pretty good eye on, pretty good handle on this race. Really, though, it boiled down to, it's always so difficult when we talk about course records and things like that. You got to really kind of put it into context. But Really, regardless of how you chop this one up, this was an eye-opening performance from Oscar Performance. Here's the stretch run from Larry Colmus.
Outside, Majula closing down the center. Balarox is next. Force the pass and fire away. Oscar Performance has taken the lead after 3/4 in 108.36. Oscar Performance a length and a half. Major Look on the outside is second. And then Voodoo Song toward the inside. It's Oscar Performance in front. Oscar Performance wins the poker by a length and a half over.
Oscar Performance gets the job done in the Grade 3 poker in course record time. Stops the clock in 1:31.23. Major Look runs second at odds of 3-1. And Voodoo Song rounds out your trifecta at odds of 9-1. Let's take a look deeper at Oscar Performance. 7 of 12 lifetime, 8 times in the money, $1.9 million in career earnings. Owned by Ammerman Racing, LLC. Trained by Brian Lynch. Bred by Mrs. Jerry Ammerman in the state of Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Jose Ortiz. You can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card by Kitten's Joy out of a theatrical mare named Divine Actress. No time form U.S. figures available at this time, but from a buyer standpoint, 104 buyer speed figure for Oscar Performance. Look at the fractions of this race. 22, 44-3, 8-1. They stopped the clock in 31-1. Now, a lot of that has to do with that turf course. Everyone and their brother that's paid attention to New York realizes that it is incredibly firm and incredibly fast, to the point where it's almost like asphalt. So take the time with a bit of a grain of salt, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that this wasn't a giant effort from Oscar Performance. And the thing that's most impressive now, to me anyway, is Oscar Performance is showing the willingness to sit, where before he was the kind of horse that really needed to be forward if he was going to have any serious chance of winning. Now, he came from mid-pack going down the backside. You now start doing that. He's also the high weight in this race, if you believe and you buy into that kind of stuff. If you put all that together, he kicked home in 22.79. This could be a major league miler. We've got a race like the Breeders' Cup Mile down at Churchill this year. Brian Lynch has said that the mile seems really like what's in his wheelhouse, what hits him right between the eyes. This was a major league effort no matter how you look at it, and especially coming off of the layoff. We haven't seen him since the Breeders' Cup weekend. This was a big league effort from this horse. I think another horse that deserves some credit is Voodoo Song. Perhaps one that you want to throw in your DRF horse watch because he was up there contesting those fractions. And okay, he was beaten by 2.5 lengths, but he ran really, really well to finish third. He was clear of some of the other horses coming from off of the pace. I thought that was a big league effort and a horse, again, that, you know what, there are instances and there are opportunities for him down the road. Voodoo Song, maybe one to file away. I suppose disappointing for Balarox, but at the same time, he was close to that pace as well, coming off of a little bit of a layoff, and he felt the effects of it. Same with Force the Pass, excuse me. I don't know if he can still run at this level, though, so I don't know so much if I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But and Major Look, the runner-up, he ran really well in here for Pletcher. I have to be honest with you, though, to me, I'm sorry, I said for Pletcher, that was for Chad Brown. For me, this race boils down to 2 horses I'm interested in. One would be on more of a wagering standpoint for a possible opportunity for a horse like Voodoo Song to show up wherever he shows up next. But big picture, Oscar Performance is prime to be a major, major player in this sort of middle distance division for the rest of the year, wherever they choose to run him. 104 buyer, hard to argue with that, showing a new versatility, a new dimension, and it's nice to see. He's kind of doing this as he continues to get older and continues to figure this thing out. He's already worth his weight in gold, but boy, this is a really, really talented horse. Oscar Performance gets the job done in course record fashion in the Grade 3 poker on Father's Day with a 104 buyer. We're going to dive into this week's stakes montage. You're going to have racing from Delaware Park, Santa Anita, Belmont, Woodbine, Monmouth, you name it. It's all in there. Here it is, this week's stakes montage.
On the far outside, bidding for the upset as they turn for a home. On the outside, it's Teresa Z. On the inside, You Know 2's running a big one in her debut in 2018. Next in line, it's Sneaky Betty. A late run from Tequilita, but it's too little and too late. Teresa Z edging away. Teresa Z. Danny Centeno wins the Obeya. Looks like You Know 2 holds on a second over Sneaky Betty. Tequilita.
Outside a half length, Blame the Rider. 2.5 lengths, Arawak, followed by Respect the Hustle. Riverboyne at the 8th pole, strides clear. Leads 2 lengths to Blame the Rider, followed by Arawak, then Respect the Hustle. It's Riverboyne clear close to home in the Rainbow Stakes. Riverboyne resuming his win streak at Santa Anita Park. Back on top of the ground, he's far superior.
Blame the Rider. 45.23 half. They're into the stretch. Pico Uno still there by 2 to Cozy Spring. Holiday Disguise with her work cut out for her. Has to shift ground to the outside. Absolutely is next, but Pico Uno's far out in front here. Manny Franco and Pico Uno will not be caught. They're going to win the Dancin' Renee for fun by 4.5 lengths under the wire to Cozy
Mr. Havercamp's come with a withering run, and Mr. Havercamp has gone to the front. On the outside, running home is Where's the Widget, and Mr. Havercamp racing away. Down the outside, Where's the Widget, King Sport behind, but it's Mr. Havercamp, full of run and full of talent and full of promise. Mr. Havercamp by 4 lengths. Where's the Widget second? Last, Dicky Michaud at the top of the lane in front. My arch enemy kicking on a bit. And down the centre, Grizel, Sister Nation out wide. And now Gamble's Ghost. And Gamble's Ghost is mowing them down. Gamble's Ghost racing home on the outside. And cuts home to take the lead in the Trillium. And she is back with a vengeance. Gamble's Ghost, 3/4 Iggy Michaud.
Justaholic, Roaming Union, chased intently by Supreme Aura in the center of the track. Now it's Roaming Union or Supreme Aura. Roaming Union opens up 3. Supreme Aura's chasing gamely in the center of the track. Roaming Union by 2. Supreme Aura motoring on the outside. Here comes Supreme Aura under a perfect ride from Joe Bravo to win the Pegasus.
There you have it, this week's stakes montage on the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show. And let's button things up here for this week. Let's dive into the weekend's best performances from a buyer speed figure standpoint. And let's take a look at the chart here. Best 3-year-old male performance on dirt. King Zachary with a 98 buyer winning the Matt win at Churchill Downs. 3-year-old fillies on dirt. Ollie's Candy. We saw her win the Summertime Oaks with a 90 buyer. 3-year-old males on turf. We have a tie between River Boyne and Golden Brown. They both earned 87 buyers in the Rainbow and the Horn Stakes. 3-year-old fillies on turf. Beyond Blame. She won the Regret down at Churchill Downs underneath the lights. 87 buyer. Older male on turf. Pavel with a 101. He topped things off at the top of the show in the Stephen Foster Handicap. Older females on dirt. Pico Uno. Saw her in the montage, winning the Dancin' Renee at Belmont Park with a 96 buyer. Older males on turf. Oscar Performance. We spoke about him in that last video that we recapped. 104 buyer winning the Poker on Father's Day. And the older fillies and mares on turf, a tie, 3-way tie actually, in an allowance race from Churchill Downs. All of them earned 91 buyer speed figures. Girls Know Best, Just a Lady, and Ruby Notion. There they are, the weekend's best performances from a buyer speed figure standpoint on the Matt Bernier Show. Let's take a look and see what's on deck for this week from a DRF TV standpoint. We have all sorts of DRF bets races of the day for you. We have DRF formulator angles. We have Woodbine plays of the day. We will have the latest as far as out of the gate is concerned. We will have a preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show. We'll have the DRF Players podcast. We'll have all sorts of coverage from Royal Ascot, which kick off. If you're listening to this live on Tuesday, it's already started. If you're listening to this podcast on Monday night or early Tuesday morning, you can probably have it going on just as the races are going. NBCSN will have all that coverage for the remainder of the week. So big things going on over there at Royal Ascot and all sorts of good stuff happening here stateside all week on DRF TV. Again, if you are listening to this live, thank you for doing so. Live.drf.com, livestream.com, Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. If you listen in the podcast form, like most of you do. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com. On YouTube, click the subscribe button. You'll get all the latest from DRF TV. Also give us those thumbs up. That's always appreciated. As well as positive reviews and a little bit of any sort of a write-up over on iTunes. Would be greatly appreciated. As usual, this show wraps things up on Tuesday, the recap edition. We'll be back again for a preview edition coming up on Friday. Before then, or until then anyway, best of luck however you play, whatever you play, wherever you play. This has been the Matt Bernier Show.